Welcome everyone to the AI-generated test data webinar hosted by 𝐸𝐴. Today we will deep dive into the value of AI-generated test data. Before we do a short introduction into 𝐸𝐴. 𝐸𝐴 is an Amsterdam-based startup with a focus on AI-generated test data. As winner of the Philips Innovation Award, looking forward to deep dive into the value of AI-generated test data together with you all. We are supported by top players in the field of AI and data security. Tin Capital, venture capital firm focusing on cybersecurity solutions. Part of the IBM Hyperprotect Accelerator, focusing on cybersecurity tech, and SaaS, market leader in analytics. And today's agenda will be all about AI-generated test data. We will start with an introduction to the speakers. Then we will start with an interview with Baris and 𝐸𝐴. We will continue with an introduction to AI-generated test data, where we will also include a live demonstration of our synthetic data platform. And we will end with some Q&A. Practical details. Today we will not share the chat, so any questions that you will have during the webinar can be shared with us via this email address, info@𝐸𝐴.ai. We will select and cover some questions in the end. So if you have any questions, please share them via the email. And if you do not have time to answer them during the webinar, we will come back to you with a private email address. And after this webinar, we will share the slides with you so that you have all information relevant of today's webinar. So as an introduction to the speakers, my name is Wim Kees Jansen, one of the founders of 𝐸𝐴. Have a background in the financial sector, focusing on developing various software applications ranging from mobile apps to online platforms. And they typically face challenges in getting the test data right. And today I will share, of course, some challenges that I face in practice, and how we solve them. Next up, Baris, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me, by the way, clearly, because I had a problem with the internet?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, good. My name is Barış. I'm working as a senior software development engineer in test at 𝐸𝐴, based in Amsterdam. Currently, I'm living in Amsterdam. Before that, I was living in Istanbul, Turkey, and I have totally 7 years experience in banking and financial sectors, mostly in test automation and software development in test sector.
Thanks, and of course we will deep dive into those experiences today. 𝐸𝐴, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, no problem. Hi to everybody, welcome as well. My name is 𝐸𝐴. I'm a privacy and IT lawyer located in Groningen and working with 𝐸𝐴 for a while. Very interested in new technologies, and what we try to do is to make some products and handy assessments to comply with the GDPR and other sector-specific regulations in new technology. That is what we do.
Thanks. And lastly, Marijn, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, surely. My name is Marijn, also co-founder at 𝐸𝐴. Have a more technical background in cybersecurity, but also software development. So really looking forward to the session today.
Thanks. And as mentioned, the topic of today is AI-generated test data. Before we start, let's start with an interview with Baris and 𝐸𝐴. And key question is, of course, Baris, maybe to you, why do we actually need test data?
Good. Actually, before that, I think it's necessary to explain what is test data, what test data means. In the theory, test data is any forms of the data, like documents, like pictures, like videos, or other media that is used in the testing different applications. But in fact, we use data not only for the software, also we use data in our daily life, in the work we do with constantly. Whether, for instance, whether we turn on our computer on the morning, we need to enter some credentials. If you want to buy a ticket from a website, we also need to enter some filters for some search criteria. There are many areas that we use test also data in our daily life. It's not only related to software. But as our topic, just as we cannot do many operations in daily life without using test data, we cannot use many applications also without test data in the software. In the shortly, without test data, we will be stuck in a restricted playground, I think. And if we want to move forward, we need to test data.
Thanks. Yeah, indeed. And yeah, testing and development with high quality test data is essential. Yeah, of course, to develop state-of-the-art tech solutions, but of course in many other fields. But using original production data, that seems like an obvious solution, right? But what do the regulations say? Marie-José, maybe you can provide us with some insights.
Yeah, the legislator is quite clear about it, that it's not allowed. But as always, there are some back doors, but they're not very wide open. And maybe it's good to explain why that is the case. Because the main goal of data protection is to be accountable for all the purposes where you use data for, and for testing, that is not primarily the goal why you process personal data. And of course, by testing there can be other various risks if you test it, and mostly where there's connected systems. A lot of failures and mistakes can happen. So, and that can have a very big impact on the privacy of the people. So that is why they're very strict in using personal data for test purposes.
Yeah, clear indeed. And maybe which organizations actually do have to pay extra attention to this?
What kind of organizations do have to pay extra attention? Well, of course, where there's sensitive personal data on a large scale, but also of vulnerable target groups, minorities, or people with a criminal background or whatever. So there's also a very important part in the discrimination field. That is what we don't want, is that also if you use AI, that is also part of your business, of course, is that we don't want another case of the toeslagenaffaire. So you have to be careful. There's a lot of processing possible, but you have to think about it and make it a privacy by design. And then there are possibilities, but I think that the point that I looked up is that there are very good alternatives, and that is why we're here today.
Yeah, exactly. And what would be alternatives when using production test data is not allowed?
Is it a question to me?
Yeah, maybe you can share some examples. Or
yes, there's a lot of possible, but I can imagine that it depends on the process and the phase where you're developing software. In the beginning, it's not very necessary to use real production data, but in the end, when you are for live going, then it can be more helpful. But in the beginning, you can mask or shuffle or make up some data and make it anonymized. There are a lot of alternatives, and of course, not less important, the synthetic data.
Yeah, exactly. And testing without production data. Maybe back to Baris. What are your experience with that?
Actually, I have been working in the financial field for about 7 years that I mentioned before. Therefore, the data when we use the software test applications was usually personal data and financial data that was belong to the customers. So the data that we used was quite sensitive. If I summarize my experience about test data in my previous experience, in my first period, generally I use static test data. It's hard-coded or from external files, from internal files, or from database repositories. That was most used method in my previous experience. Also, copying the production data as gold copy and changing the some sensitive information with some specific methods like masking, like shuffling some data, and use this data as test data was another solution. But however, in many countries today, you cannot use production data due to regulation and GDPR rules. Also, you cannot take a gold copy of your production data. That means you have to continue with other options. For this reason, we created our own solutions to create test data without touching the production data. For example, when we need an account or a customer, we just try to create this customer data or account data by calling some services or some API endpoints, or if you need to create maybe credit card that has some installments or some transactions, you have to follow some multiple steps, and generating this data makes everything a bit more complicated. If I give an example, to solve this issue, you need to create a data flow for generating this test data. At first, you have to create a customer and you have to pass some dummy parameters to this customer. And after that, you have to create an account that's related to this customer. And after that, you have to create a credit card. When you create your credit card, after that, you have to create some transactions by calling some services or APIs that you have. But after this 4 acts, you can create your credit card transaction successfully, but you still have to deal with some other problems. What are they? All these steps should run sequentially and automatically. This is important. You must store this data in a secure way. You also should state that this data is suitable for one-time using or multiple using. You should also create a reservation system so that test scenarios running in parallel don't use the same data at the same time. There are many problems you have to deal. For those reasons, we created our own solution, and with this, for creating, for storing on, for reserving data, I think we solved this problem in my previous experience.
Yeah, clear. I think, and it sounds indeed like a lot of work and manual steps involved of getting the test data up to speed.
Yes.
And yeah, maybe what challenges do you face when testing software applications?
I think in technical side, there are two biggest problems that I encountered in my previous experience. First of it, I think the stability of environment. I want to give an example with a metaphor that I listen and read in some articles and some events. It's called as Formula One rally race. Just as in a rally race, the track where the race will take place must be smooth, it must be stable. Otherwise, the race car cannot drive as expected. The environment of race should be stable. Some bumps on the road can slow your speed, can reduce your flexibility, or it cause an accident maybe. I think the same rule applies to the software. If your test environments don't work as your expectation, you may encounter many problems. In the sector, it's called as DTAP environments, development, test, acceptance, and production environments. For all companies, these all environments should be stable as much as possible for executing test scenario. From my point of view, I think the second one is the test data. I can continue with the same metaphor. If you don't put fuel in your race car, your car won't be able to move forward. At this point, the fuel is what you need to move forward. Test data has the same importance within the application. If you don't have the data to test your application, your progress is impossible. But the fuel is not enough for the race car. the time spent at the pit stop at the race is also a really important factor that affects the race. The faster you make your change and meet your needs, the better your chance of winning. I think also the same is true for the test data. If you take longer to obtain the test data used in the software, you may encounter an error. For example, you are executing some scripts automatically, and before that you are creating your test data, and if you have timeouts that's longer, more than your expectation, it creates some problems in your quality and test processes.
I really like the metaphor of using cars and test data as being the fuel of getting the car up to speed. And yeah, let's see. But maybe as final question, how do you see the future of test infrastructure?
I think I cannot give a specific time, but I think in the future, many of solutions will be AI based. I'm sure of that. Not only test data, also I think software applications and productions also will be AI generated. In test data, if we get back to your question, I think not the last so far future, but I think maybe in a few years, many companies will start to create their data generation solutions with AI-based approaches. It also applies for the productions and applications.
Thanks, and yeah, it sounds really interesting, especially if you, as you mentioned, test data as the fuel of software development, and yeah, let's explore a little bit if AI can be used to generate fuel for testing software solutions. And that brings us to the points of yeah, exploring AI-generated test data. And yeah, to summarize, the challenges around privacy and software development in getting the test data right are, as mentioned, using production data is not allowed due to privacy regulations. Business logic is not preserved, while production-like test data is of the essence. And yeah, classic test data management tools require manual work, are not scalable, and yeah, cost a lot of time. And yeah, those are the challenges that we aim to overcome in order to get the test data right, get the fuel for software development right. And that's really our mission, really be able to transform privacy by design into a competitive advantage in order to have the fuel ready for driving software development further. As a short recap to classic test data management solutions, what we typically see is examples of the following. So we see, for example, generalization. Someone is 27 years old and you're going to place him in buckets between 25 and 30 years old. Or suppression or wiping, so you have identifiers and you simply remove them from the data. Pseudonymization, so you have an identifier and you simply replace it by a code or a hash. And then row and column shuffling, first you have an aligned data set and then you just shuffle it around. Yeah, to illustrate those disadvantages, we typically have this trade-off between data quality and privacy protection. So you can, of course, apply those techniques, but then you will typically always have a privacy risk because it stays the original data. And maybe you can recognize who this is. And to overcome that, you can, of course, apply those techniques more and more till you basically end up in the left side, where basically your data is destroyed. And the most important disadvantage here is that it takes a lot of time and manual work to get that data up to speed because they work different for each data set and for each data type. And especially because test environments and production environments get complicated and bigger, it's a big challenge for many software organizations and companies that develop tech in-house. And to get to AI-generated test data, we typically see original sensitive data. This is a really simple snippet of an original data set. You see a couple of columns and rows. Of course, you have multiple data sets and many columns and rows. But the process is we have our 𝐸 engine. It's an artificial intelligence-based platform. It learns statistics, patterns, and relationships of the original data, and that's why we see here the learning process with AI. in order to generate completely new data points. Synthetic data, completely new generated data. But the key difference is that with our AI engine, we are able to model those new data points in such a way that we preserve the statistics, patterns, and relationships of the original data in the synthetic data. And that's basically also why we call it a synthetic data twin, because it's really able to do analysis on the synthetic data as if it is the original data. And that's basically the essence of our platform. Really create a digital twin of your production environment and use that in your test environment. And to give you an idea about the properties and the data quality, so what we see here is a couple of data variables, and in gray you see the original data, and in blue you see the synthetic data. And when we zoom in, for example, a categorical value and a continuous value, they really overlap. For example, for churn and the age. So what you can see is how many people are in the data set with an age of 50. Okay, so many people, and then you see that the original data is really similar to the synthetic data. We also do that with correlations, the relationship between variables. We used color intensity to illustrate it, but the essence is that we also preserve the correlations. And finally, we also do this for analytics, and we recently hosted a demo together with SAS, where we demonstrated a churn use case in the telecom sector. If you're interested in more analytics kind of use cases, more than happy to invite you to also watch this webinar, and the link will be shared after this webinar with you. But then coming back to synthetic data, it really is a solution where on the one hand we protect privacy because it contains really new synthetic data records, while we model them on data set level to such an extent that we preserve the value of the data. And that's really the value that we bring as well for software development and using AI generated test data. And so typically you have a production environment with production data, and that is typically a multi-table database. And we learn, of course, the statistics, patterns, and relationships to create a digital twin of your production environment and use that in your test environment. So that's typically how it works with test environments. And the value is, of course, that you have production-like data, privacy by design, and the one-click approach, meaning that the model does everything automatically, and you have a solution that works easy, fast, and agile. This comes with our AI-generated test data platform that is available based on a license. And we optimized our solution that we can easily deploy anywhere, and that we can connect with any platform, file, database, or file system. And to deep dive a little bit on that further, so with easy deploy, we really mean that we can deploy wherever the client wants us to deploy. So that can be on-premise, in a private cloud environment, so that can be in your own Azure, AWS, IBM, or any other cloud provider environment. Or we provide our solution via an API, and then we are hosted in the IBM HyperProtect cloud. So that's about deployment. And then connectors. So we optimize our solution that we can connect to the source and the target data. We do that. We are able to do that with, for example, with flat files, but also with databases, file systems, applications, and of course, many more. And in terms of the runtime, so we already mentioned the one-click approach. So there's only one click required to generate an end-to-end digital twin of your production environment. And really for huge databases, it can take up to 1 hour. For smaller databases and production environment, it typically takes up a couple of minutes. And this is basically how it integrates. So you have your production environment. We have a connector to the 𝐶INTO engine so that everything happens automatically. The 𝐶INTO engine generates the synthetic data twin. We have a connector to your test environment, load the synthetic data twin automatically in your test environment. And from there, you can, of course, start testing with the synthetic test data. And a typical question that we sometimes receive is how you have your digital twin of your production data. Sometimes you actually want to optimize your test data with new data. We also support features for that. That will be a topic of the next webinar, but to give you some ideas, how we support also features to be able to generate completely new data out of the blue, to generate more data if you do not have enough data yet, or smart data combination generators, to also generate data that potentially can happen in the future. As mentioned, if you have questions, share them via our email address, info@zinto.ai. And before we go to the questions, I will hand over the word to Marijn for a live demo of our platform. Marijn, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, then the question is, of course, how does it actually work in practice? So we can have a brief demo followed by some questions on, which you still may have. So yeah, our platform works like this. You log in as a user. You get to our landing screen, with a couple of nice Zinto videos, but also this landing screen allows you to create a new workspace, which you need for defining your synthetic data job. And yeah, you can open a workspace you created before. So potentially maybe you created a workspace before where you generated a synthetic database, and now you want to use that workspace again to refill your synthetic database. But in this situation, we are now going to create a new workspace from scratch, in particular my SQL database. So as Kees just mentioned, we have 20 plus different database and file system connectors, which we support. We can easily extend them as well in case you have one we haven't seen before. Let's start with this MySQL database that we want to synthesize. So I will now give a name to the workspace. So let's call it workspace demo. I will fill in the host. I have a MySQL server running in Azure currently, which I'm connecting to. I'll define the port. The database name is a public database that we want to synthesize. I define the database details. We can potentially set some security settings here. In this case, I will enable SSL for setting up a secure transfer of the data. Okay, so now I've connected with my original database, but I want to also connect to a target database where I want to write the synthetic data to. So let's connect, actually in this case, to the same host. You can also connect to a different host. In this case, we have a different database on the same host. I write it to a different database, which we will call Circular Synthetic. Enable SSL, test the connection, and we can confirm. So now I have created the actual workspace, and in this view you see actually in the left part of the screen the actual database schema and tables that fall under it, which we have just connected to. So yeah, a couple of different tables, so we can look what kind of data is in these tables. Now we are at the customer table. Potentially, so now all tables are pre-selected to that we want to include them in the synthetic data job, but potentially you can also exclude particular columns if you don't want to involve them in the run. Or you can duplicate them. That basically means you copy the table over as is. If it, for instance, doesn't contain any sensitive data. But for now, we just will synthesize all the tables. And we will also use the default settings. But you can also potentially change the default settings for within tables and for specific columns, because we have a number of different methods for generating the synthetic data. For instance, you can use AI-powered generation, where you basically use the original database as a basis for generating your synthetic database, which will then resemble really the original database as closely as possible. But there can also be situations, of course, where you, for instance, want to generate data out of nothing. For instance, if there are particular test scenarios which you want to test for, but you don't have any data for yet. So then you can also potentially fill your tables with new columns with new data. So we have a number of different mockers for filling those tables and columns with mock data essentially. So yeah, for now we just leave everything as is. Just use the default settings which are automatically inferred by our software. But before I start to generate the generate process, I will first walk you through a couple of additional features, such as the PII scan. After creating the workspace, on the background a scan has been run, which automatically infers columns in your database with personally identifiable information, such as names, addresses, postal codes, phone numbers. So it actually automatically infers those PII columns and suggests a mocker or generator for those columns. So yeah, in this case, we just want to, we trust that all these columns are correctly identified as PII, can apply them all. Then we go to the next step, which is the foreign keys feature. And I want to note here, of course, you want to preserve referential integrity across your tables in your database because you want to keep the relationships that are in your database and also want to see them in your synthetic database. So yeah, we automatically infer those relationships from the database, which can in your database already be defined. But what we also do is that we run an additional scan on top of that, which is a foreign key scan, which is able to identify possible relationships across tables which are not defined already in your database. That can be especially helpful if you have a database where, all your foreign keys are maybe not so well defined. Then this will really help you to discover those relationships. So yeah, here these are already the identified relationships. We will also apply them all. And yeah, now we are actually ready to start the synthetic. So I will refresh. So this was the original database I just connected to, and where we were reading from. So for instance, let's have a look at the customer table. So these are all values that were present in the original database. So now have a look at also the synthetic database and the same customer table. Let's see at the actual values that are in there. And yeah, as you can see, it's filled with entirely synthetic customers in this occasion. So yeah, all these particular records are entirely fictional. They are not no real existing customers, but they are still very representative and similar to the original database. We can also have a look at the other tables. For instance, let's have a look at a payment table. You can see it's also filled with realistic amounts, and you can use this synthetic database as a basis for any tests you want to do. So yeah, this is basically how the Zinto software works. And yeah, as you can see, in a matter of minutes, you can generate entirely new synthetic databases where you actually can preserve the privacy and where everyone can get easy access to the data. So that's basically it.
Thanks, Marijn, for the demo. I think that provided us with a lot of insights in the synthetic data platform. We received a lot of questions via the email. If you still have questions, share them via info@zinto.ai. We try to cover a couple of them. We have a couple of minutes left for some questions. So if you have questions, feel free to share them via info@zinto.ai. And if we cannot handle them during this webinar, we will share an answer via the email afterwards. And of course, feel free to schedule a one-on-one demo with us for a further deep dive, because of course now we only showed the highlights of our platform, and more than happy to deep dive further in case there are specific questions. And I will share it with all of you after this email, after this webinar. But to start with a question, this question came actually before your demonstration, Marijn, so I don't know if it still makes sense, but the question was, is there manual work required, and is there knowledge required for working with your platform?
Yeah, so yeah, indeed, so as you could just see, yeah, the aim is to make it as easy as possible, as fast as possible. And yeah, so basically what we just did, we used the default settings which were defined by the Synthos software and started to run. So there was minimal manual work involved. You can, of course, adjust specific settings for generating your synthetic data. So as I just showed, for each column, you can define the type of, mocker, for instance, you want to use. For instance, you can fill a column with realistic first names or realistic addresses. So you can configure those things, but we try to make it as easily usable as possible. Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Okay.
Classic one. Classic one. Still happens in these days. But a second question. Are there limits in the use of the platform? Or, for example, if you use many tables with a lot of dependencies between the tables, are there limitations in using the Synthos platform?
Of course, there are always limitations, but yeah, I would say we actually support, yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, huge database. So that can be in terms of tables where you have lots of records, but also databases with hundreds or even thousands of tables, because basically we can the software is set up that it's scalable, so it can easily go through those tables and synthesize them. So yeah, in that perspective, not really, I would say, but yeah, of course, if you have a very large database, it will take a little bit longer, but it should still at least synthesize your database.
Yeah. So the limitation is mainly about that it takes a little bit longer. And maybe another question is, we received a lot of questions about really specific connectors, but I want to keep that question a little bit more general. How does it work if a specific connector is required, for example?
Yeah, so yeah, as I mentioned, we have a lot of connectors already inbuilt for connecting with different types of databases or file systems, flat files. But yeah, yes, it's often the case that we work with a new customer and they have a different or exotic database we haven't worked with before. But yeah, we can relatively easily. So far, actually, all those connectors we could support and relatively easy add to the list of connectors we already support. Yeah, so I think the most of the popular databases and the file systems are already supported. But if you have something exotic and curious to know, then we will try to add it in. Yeah.
Clear. Another question was about does this solution work different across sectors? So a question was specifically about the financial sector and the healthcare sector. So the question is, does it work different in sectors or for specific data sets?
No, actually not really, because from a technical standpoint, data in the financial sector and the healthcare sector. From a technical standpoint, they're still similar, actually. Actually, no, not really. No.
Thanks. I think almost the final question. How do you make sure that the data generation process and that the data points actually make sense? For example, how do you make sure that the age of people is never below 0?
Right. Yeah. So that comes down to how you would synthesize, for instance, the age column. Yeah, so like the default setting, that would be picked up by our software is that, yeah, if you have an age column in your original database, where, for instance, you have age values between the age of 20 until the age of 80, then in your synthetic database that will automatically by our AI be inferred. So in the synthetic database, you will also have ages which fall within between 20 till 80. So you will retain those min and max values. So that's basically if you already use our AI to generate it. Let's say maybe you want to generate a completely new column where you maybe didn't have the age column yet in your original database. Then you can also use our mockers, where you define a column with age values, and then you can define an actual min and max value. So that's the alternative option if you want to create data from scratch, basically. Yeah.
Clear. And the final question was how can we explore this in practice? Is there anything how clients typically start with this platform?
Yeah, we usually start with a proof of value, we call it. So before fully deploying it in your organization, we can work on a proof of value where we can really demonstrate that the tool works for you. And after that, we can actually fully deploy it in your organization and run the software in your own secure environment or use our own cloud. Both are alternatives. Yeah.
Clear. And I would like to invite all of you, if you're interested, to get in touch with our experts. I will put our contact details on the screen, so you can reach out directly to me via my email address. You can schedule a meeting or a demo via our website, zinto.ai/meet. And yeah, then you can automatically either schedule a deep dive or a demo with us or further deep dive into the platform of our technical questions. And if you're interested, we have, of course, career opportunities. More than happy to get in touch with that. For that, I would like to thank a lot the speakers of today's webinar. Thanks a lot, Baris, for your insights about and your experiences about using test data in practice at KNAPP and your experiences and challenges that you face. Also, thanks a lot, 𝐸_Bondhuis, for your insights into the legal aspects of using test data. What are the possibilities and what are more the no-goes? Thanks for that. We already mentioned before, we would be more than happy to have drinks afterwards. That might be for the next physical webinar slash demo. And I would like to invite you all to follow our LinkedIn page to get in touch for the next session. For that, I would like to end the session. Thanks a lot all for your attention. Hope we were able to inspire you, and hope to see you all either in our next session or in a one-to-one deep dive or demo. And feel free to reach out for anything. Thanks a lot.